Hey, it's Nikachu, and today we are going to go over the easiest modern decks to play tier list. And I know what you must be thinking.
My deck is not that easy, Nikachu. You don't understand.
No, look, listen up. Every deck on this list, I will admit, if you've got the skill, there are edges to be won. You can definitely improve your win percentage. There's certainly decks on this list where you're going to need that skill to be in the plus above 50%, but that's not what we're talking about here. What I'm talking about is how high is the floor? Which decks in Modern will give you the highest win percentage if you have no skill whatsoever? Like you just started playing the game a few days ago, or you're a pony that's been playing for years. I believe that the archetypes listed here, even if you played them terribly, you'll still go like 35% or 40% overall, whereas if you had Death Shadow in your hand and you played it terribly, you could easily just go 0%. Modern is what it is because you have to earn your victories. However, these decks have a few too many freebies. But before we get into our tier list, we're going to thank our sponsor, FusionGamingOnline.com. If any of today's decks look like a really nice, comfy way to get into Modern, Fusion Gaming is always packing singles. And if they're out of stock, just hit that wish list button. You'll be emailed when they're back in inventory. And if you make any purchases at Fusion Gaming, don't forget to use coupon code Nikachu at checkout. It supports the channel and gets you 5% off all your purchases. All right, let's go over what these tiers mean. We've got here in the middle, we got easy, and then it can get too easy or so easy even a caveman can do it. And then we got easy enough, which means it's a little, it's not that easy. And then, it's not always so easy. Some of these decks, they can get some free wins, but outside of that, sometimes they're very difficult to play, so, it's not easy for everybody. But let's start this all off with Burn, of course! This is stereotyped as one of the easiest decks to play in Modern, and with good reason. It actually circumvents a very large portion of the game. A lot of what it does is more or less the same thing. Yes, you could use that lightning bolt, not only on your opponent's face, but also on maybe their creatures or a planeswalker. It has so many modes. But let's be serious, there is a large chunk of Burn games where if you're just throwing them all at your opponent's face, then you're not necessarily doing anything wrong. It may not always be optimal, but you're still gonna get victories out of it. And there's more than enough burn in the deck to kill your opponent consistently by turn 4. You go turn 1, 3 damage. Turn 2, play Boros Charm. You're up to 7. Turn 3, play Lightning Helix, another bolt. Your opponent's down to 7. Turn 4, you're most certainly going to kill them. Sitting across from a Burn player, I think the single hardest part about playing Burn is just remembering your Eidolon of the Great Revel trigger. I mean, if you don't want to remember it, that's fine with me. I don't have to say anything. And you better believe I'm not going to forget the trigger when you play spells. Now, you could say Burn is like really, really hard to play when the metagame is out against it. If there's a lot of life gain or the right sideboard cards, this deck is madness. But you know what? A lot of people, they just dump Burn at that point. It's really powerful as sort of a seasonal deck. It's been piloted by so many pro players, but only when it's well positioned. A lot of the pro players, they're not perfecting or mastering Burn for the long run. They just use it as a secret weapon when the metagame calls for it. So when it's hard, yeah, sure, it's damn near impossible, but when it's easy, I mean, the games play themselves. And one of the main reasons for this is that, there's barely anything you have to calculate in combat. Can you attack? Then attack. You can't attack because there's like a Gurmag Angler in front of you. Okay, don't attack. A lot of the cards do the same thing. So you just burn face, burn face, burn face. So Burn easily one of the decks that is so easy, even a caveman can do it. Now, of course, like I said, it can get hard, but it's not because the deck is hard to win with. It's just that the metagame has overly adjusted against the Burn deck. Their strategy can be very fragile, but at the same time, it is so streamlined when it works. Burn is as easy as putting on Velcro sneakers. After all, how do you screw that up? Next, let's talk Heliod Company. Nothing makes me sweat harder, sweat buckets, like being up against an absolute pony with 2-card combos in their deck. That makes me so nervous. Sweat is coming out from my butt cheeks. The problem is I know I'm a superior player against my opponent. However, that is completely undermined by combos. If you set up the infinite life combo between Spike Feeder and Heliod Suncrown, which is easy to do. I mean, I can't destroy the Heliod. You can collected company this combo directly into play. You could just ramp into it by turn 3. Turn 2 Heliod company, turn 3 Spike Feeder. And if I don't have any sort of sufficient interaction, I'm dead. Like, if I have no alternate way to beat infinite life, the game is over. And that's not even the only 2-card combo in the deck. You got the Walking Ballista combo. So, I mean, if you have a Walking Ballista on the battlefield with 2 counters with the Heliod out, you give the Walking Ballista lifelink, and there's another combo. Instant kill. Maybe I got you down to 1 life, and then all of a sudden, you start tapping the mana, and I'm like, oh my god, please don't go up to 4. You tap the 4th mana. Walking Ballista, and I'm doomed. And the point is, 2-card combos completely circumvent any skill advantage in this game. Oh, look at that. I've got card A out, and I got card B. I guess I win. Now, this deck is a little bit more nuanced, because if you don't have the combo, you might just have a bunch of dirtly creatures. And I have to admit, just like Eidolon the Great Revel out of the burn deck, poor players have trouble remembering their triggers. So if you have Heliod Sunground out, or you have Auriok Champion, you might lose a lot of value if you forget your triggers. You also can't forget that you should not always go for your combo. Sometimes it's just not going to be worth going for. Just play 2 Auriok Champions and start attacking with Heliod, and it will get the job done. So for that reason, we're going to put Heliod at easy enough. The deck definitely has free wins, and where if there's free wins, the deck is going to be easy. And I think there are enough interactions between like Conclave Mentor, Auriok Champion, and Spike Feeder that doesn't make this deck as straightforward as most decks. But this deck really is as easy as A plus B equals victory. Next, let's look at Humans, the most proactive, most powerful creature deck probably ever in existence when Humans was on top. I mean, there was nothing that could stand a chance against it. It had an incredibly powerful, strong aggro strategy coupled together with a lot of interaction and prison-like effects like Meddling Mage and Thalia, Garden of Thraben. But the powerful cards like Champion of the Parish, Thal's Lieutenant, mixed in with Mantis Rider in the air, so it had the evasion, made this like just the de facto aggro deck in Modern. I think the hardest aspect of this deck is what you name with Meddling Mage, but that has less to do with the deck and just your knowledge about the metagame in general. But who cares? I've lost to Humans so many times, even when they named the most absolute useless card that's not even in my deck with Meddling Mage. What makes Humans pretty easy to play is that your creatures, generally speaking, are going to be way larger than your opponents. That Champion of the Parish and those Thal's Lieutenants make for some pretty easy combat if you can just turn them sideways, because on average your stuff is just bigger than anything else your opponent is doing. Also, stuff like Thalia, Garden of Thraben, you don't really have to think about anything. You just put this card on the battlefield and it's working for you every single turn. Combat gets even easier when you play Reflector Mage. Just bounce pretty much maybe the only thing that they have on the board, or you just take to the air with Mantis Rider and Kite Sail Freebooter. So very large, fast creatures getting good chunks of damage easy through combat. That's a recipe for disaster. Now, where this deck breaks down a little bit is that if you don't have creatures on the board, this deck does nothing. And Modern is a creature removal format. Humans also has some trouble versus the super big mana deck. When you're up against big mana decks like Tron or Amulet, the question is, who's going to goldfish to victory first? And you know what? You may not have control over your fate. So may the die roll be with you for the play. I'm going to give this deck a not always so easy ranking. Really strong proactive deck, but Modern as a format full of heavy removal, big mana decks keeps Humans in check. Humans is so easy that you could recite the alphabet blindfolded. Next on the list is Infect. Now, I mean, there's no scarier thing than your opponent fumbling with their cards, barely shuffling it, presenting it to you, and then all of a sudden they go turn 1 Forest Glistener Elf. This is another one of those scenarios where, I mean, you could be the best player in the world, and if you're playing Tron, you're just gonna lose this match. So if you have no interaction, I mean, you can get turn 2, turn 3 killed pretty easily, pretty consistently. I mean, you can get 10 infect damage without breaking a sweat. You got the scale up into, I don't know, Might of Volcroza. It doesn't matter. There's many combinations to bring about a victory. And all the creatures are great. I mean, Glistener Elf comes out turn 1. Blighted Agent might come out turn 2, but who cares? It circumvents the most complicated part of Magic the Gathering, and that is creature combat. Just attack willy-nilly, don't have to worry about anything there. Blighted Agent being unblockable just slices away all the complication and calculation required in creature combat. You could say the same thing with Inkmoth Nexus. The thing is a flyer, and you know, this is one of the few decks that can beat infinite life. All right, gain infinite life, gain all the life you want, because the infect damage does not care about that. So I mean, there's other decks like Heliod Company. Oh, you want to make an easy 2-card combo? Really doesn't mean anything in this matchup, and they'll just kill you on the spot. There's certainly a lot of games where you're not even going to have removal in your hand. You might not want to tap out versus the infect deck because, hey, you got to represent something here, you know? You're doing your hardest to keep a bluff going on. In the face of all the mana, pump spell, turn the creature sideways. Do I win? Yay, I win! Now where Infect gets problematic is the fact that it has very few creatures in this deck. We're talking like Glistener Elf, Blighted Agent, Inkmoth Nexus. That's 12 creatures. You might have to mulligan for those things or you have no chance, and can be very vulnerable to Thoughtseize effects and just removal spells in general. So if you're up against a removal heavy deck that's particularly mana efficient, like, hey, Infect has the tools to protect themselves, but it's not gonna work if the opponent is still using removal spells like Lightning Bolt and Lava Dart or Gut Shot that are keeping up with the pace or mana efficiency of the Infect player. And when you're up against removal heavy decks in general, that's where that calculation is going to come into play. That's where patience is going to come into play. A lot of people look at Infect like it's a Delver deck. You got to be patient with your resources, and when the time is right, you do go for victory. And that's why this deck is not always so easy, but I do think that there are enough free wins with this deck that you're gonna get wins under your belt. Playing Infect is a lot like playing chess with your left hand. Now we move on to Is It Prowess. Now Is It Prowess is that type of archetype that's very dangerous because it is both very easy to play and it's very strong. It actually has a lot of parallels to Infect in that you want to put a small creature out and you sort of have pump spells to make the creatures bigger, except you don't have the disadvantage of these creatures being 1 toughness. Swiftspear and Soulscar Mage by default are 2 toughness. Sprite Dragon can get enormous, like just way out of control, and I mean, the deck is pretty resilient versus removal spells. I mean, you could kill the Swiftspear, you can kill the Soulscar Mage with Fatal Push. Same thing with Sprite Dragon, but what are you going to do about Stormwing Entity? Exactly what kills a Stormwing Entity? You're not going to Abrupt Decay that. You can't Fatal Push it. Even if you try to Lightning Bolt or burn it down, the Prowess triggers can get it out of range. I mean, 1 Mutagenic Growth on the Stormwing Entity, and it becomes a 6/6 creature. You can't even dismember that. And because it's 5 mana, Skyclave Apparition can't even touch it. So it's way more resilient to most removal spells, while still giving you the option to kill your opponent by turn 3 if they've got the shields down. I mean, this is going to happen versus those big mana decks like Tron, for example. Oh yeah, Tron, always considered the boogeyman of the format, but can't do dink all on the draw versus these really explosive creature decks. Turn 1 Soulscar Mage, turn 2 Swiftspear, bolt you, and then next turn all it takes is a few Lava Darts, some Mutagenic Growths, and the game is basically over. But what makes Prowess so effective, so powerful, is that it has interaction. It is a love child between the Infect deck, the Burn deck. They got together, yeah, let's go find a room, okay, and then all of a sudden they made Is It Prowess. So the pump spells that would be in the Infect deck, they are burn spells in the Prowess deck. They still make the creatures bigger, but it is the interaction that they need against their opponent's creatures, while simultaneously can go straight to the face, for damage. Now the downside to the deck is still the creature problem. If you kill the creatures, you have some way of getting rid of all of them. I mean, it's not, the burn spells aren't going to get it done. It's not like these burn spells all do 3 to 4 damage, but unlike unlike something like Infect, this deck actually can grind into more creatures on a more regular basis. I mean, it starts off with basically 16 with the 4 Swift Spears, Soul Scar Mages, Sprite Dragon, Stormwing Entity, and between light up the stage, drawing into more cards, and even Stormwing Entity being able to scry, you can keep those creatures coming and make that deck way more consistent. Basically, the hardest part of this deck is not going all in when your opponent clearly has mana up. Do not pump up your Swift Spear and Soul Scar Mage and Sprite Dragon to gigantic highs, wasting your burn spells when it's just going to get undermined by a Fatal Push or Path to Exile. Then you wasted all your burn spells. You got to save it for when your opponent is tapped out. That's when you go for the kill. So I don't think it is a very strong, a lot of easy victories with this deck, but you got to manage your creatures properly, because if you don't, then it might be a little hard. Winning with Izzet Prowess is easier than smashing like and also subscribing to my channel. Where are you people? If you love my channel, hit the subscribe button. How else am I going to get the silver play button? Next, let's look at Ponza. Now, this is a type of deck that can get some free wins, has a super proactive strategy, and is really powerful. Like, how can you go wrong with turn 2 Blood Moon? But you don't even need that sort of mana denial, and things like Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon, best backed up by a really good clock involving Klothys, Bloodbraid Elf, sometimes Glorybringer. When your deck goes big and fast, that makes for some very easy combat math, not to mention things like Klothys, indestructible, and also has really good utility, drains your opponent, makes you gain life, also adds some extra mana. The deck has tons of built-in card advantage between Seasoned Pyromancer, Renin 6, and also Bone Crusher Giant. So this deck has free win potential, also very large creatures, which makes it very easy to attack in combat, not to mention some of those are indestructible. And the game plan is pretty straightforward. Play those big creatures and go at them. So I'm putting Ponza as a deck that is too easy to play. Ponza is so easy that even a Burn player can play it. Next, we have a deck that not so well known right now, but historically it's been a big player in Modern, still around. We're talking Titan Shift. This deck, its plan is to ramp up enough lands, it plays Primeval Titan, gets the Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, starts dealing damage to you, or gets to 7-8 lands, plays Scape Shift, kill you in one shot. That is the idea. The most significant piece of interaction in this deck is playing Secura Tribe Elder, block your creature, sacrifice it to find a land. I mean, yeah, it has access to some Lightning Bolts, some Anger the Gods, but for the most part, it is just ramp spells to get to prime time, to get to Scape Shift. It's really one-dimensional like that. Plan A, ramp. Plan B, cast your win condition. So the deck is so easy. I definitely think a caveman can do it. I mean, I think the deck is so easy, you probably could just design a flow chart to determine what you should be doing. Do you only have ramp spells in hand? Yes. Play the ramp spell. No. Is there a creature on the board? No. Play the ramp spell. And lastly, now we get to Tron. Now, Tron, you can tell that this deck has a lot of power based on how many Jund pilots got so upset over losing to the Tron players that they know, oh, they're like, if I were playing any other archetype, or if they were playing any other archetype, I'd wipe the floor with them. Tron is that type of deck that you're casting super powerful spells. I mean, like, the weakest spell in that deck is what, like Wormcoil Engine? And then it goes to Karn and Ugin, then Ulamog. I mean, that deck is crazy. So because of the super powerful spells, it significantly compensates for skill disadvantage. Not to mention, a giant chunk of these permanents in the Tron deck are just untouchable. Like, what are you going to do about the lands? And even if you use things like Blood Moon or Field of Ruin, like, you got to kill the opponent within a timely manner, because the Tron player can just keep making land drops, reassemble Tron to then play their giant spells. And those spells, super resilient to removal, also resilient to creature combat. Like, Karn exiles permanents. Ugin wipes the board. Ulamog also basically like pseudo wipes the board. I mean, whatever the hell you have in play, it'll just exile the 2 largest permanents. Now, this is definitely one of the types of decks that if you play it skillfully, you're going to get all sorts of advantages that you wouldn't be if you were just a pony. Your mulligan decisions are going to have a very large impact over how consistently you get turn 3 Tron. Karn the Great Creator being added to this deck increases the complexity of the archetype because what you have to pull from the sideboard is not always so obvious. Very often you have to treat Tron like a control deck. You have to exercise patience to get the max value with things like Blast Zone and Oblivion Stone. And Oblivion Stone, if you don't have to crack it, then don't do it. Keep putting fate counters on all your permanents to protect them when you decide to crack the Oblivion Stone. But still, you can't ignore the raw power. Definitely, this is one of the easier decks. So even in the hands of a beginner, they can feel some comfort knowing that they're playing some of the most powerful spells in Modern. And of course, Tron is as easy as remembering that 1 + 1 + 1 = 7. Well, that's my video for today. You agree or disagree with my rankings? Let me know in the comments section below. Smash like for easy Modern decks. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, or you'll lose your next match to a caveman.